for a repeal. This was passed with 51 votes as a Reconciliation Act. Couldn't it be repealed with 51 votes, same way?
I think it would be an extremely difficult situation in Congress to overturn this without 60 votes. I think that in addition to that, because there is so much of this already enacted, it will be extremely difficult to take away many of these things. They keep citing polls, but the polls also point out that ending pre-existing conditions, dealing with some of the women issues like the disparity in women's health care, dealing with lifetime caps, all of these things are very popular with the public. So it is very unlikely that Congress is going to ever be able to cobble it together and go through this again. The reality is it's going to be there, so we can make this a political football and fight over this, or we can finally say, okay, after all this time, it's time to work together and make this happen. And despite the fact that I was disappointed in the comments and some of the political comments coming out yesterday, I really believe that moving forward, saner heads will prevail and that people's health care will prevail over the politics of the day. I think that's as big as it goes, and my voice just doesn't carry it. Sorry.
Kathleen, can you speak to, without the Medicaid expansion mandate, what happens to those people that would have, as the law was passed, gotten their coverage through Medicaid?
Well, right now that question is being looked at carefully by national experts. There is some concern as to whether folks under 100% of the poverty level are eligible for the subsidies. It's one of the reasons that we think it's extremely important that the state move forward and accept the entire Medicaid option that has been, the expansion that's been made available.
Other questions?
Do you have any? What do you think of their cost estimates for the so-called woodwork effect? Do you have an opinion on their calculations for that? How much that's going to cost them?
I think that I can't say one way or the other as to whether that number is exactly right, but I can say that even when we have, and let me just kind of repeat the question for people who may not have all heard it, but the question is whether or not the estimate, which I believe is $369 million by the administration for what they call the woodwork effect. Now what this means is that this isn't that the expansion would cost us that money. The expansion is being paid for by the federal government. But sometimes when newly eligible people hear the message that it's time to enroll, people who were eligible all along decide, oh, you know, they sort of come out of the woodwork, if you will. And it's also called the welcome mat effect, you know, and enroll. And here's our answer to that. Those folks are eligible now. We should be out there now helping them find their way to Medicaid, because we know that we eventually pay. I think Brian said this too. It's pay now or pay later. And when we pay later, we pay a whole lot more.
Are there any other questions? And if not, I'll ask our folks.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
On the state exchange proposal, the administration said yesterday that it would cost, they cited cost as a reason to go with the federal exchange. Do you know the difference in cost and what and could you just elaborate on it?
Well, okay. The state hired a consultant named Milliman to do a report. And Milliman said, if we do an exchange that's not so robust, it'll cost $19 million a year in non-IT costs, non-information technology costs. And if we do an exchange that's very robust, I mean, that really works hard to get people in it, it'll cost $33 million a year. So when the number 43 million was thrown out, I think that had to do with possibly putting the IT costs in. But what we have to, there's a couple things we have to remember. One is most of those IT costs will be paid for by the federal government. And if we would have applied for one of these establishments grants, which we can still do, we will see those IT costs picked up in that way. But here's the thing I really want you to remember. When you spread that 33 million, which is what Milliman said, across the number of people who will enroll, it's a penny on the premium dollar. There is a way to make the exchange pay for itself. This does not have to come out of our general revenue funds.
Do you know how it compares to the cost? Is the cost the same with having the federal government put an exchange in place?
In the early days, the federal government will end up picking up more of the cost, but ultimately, I believe we will be paying for much of that cost.
Could you talk about why it's preferable to do this for the state to do the exchange as opposed to the Fed? In the end, would the product be that much different?
You know, the state, and I know that the insurance commissioner has taken a lot of pride in this, that the state has a robust insurance market and that they do a good job of reviewing rates, etc. And I think the fact of the matter is the exchange will also have a shot at reviewing rates. And it just makes a lot of sense to do it once in Ohio. It makes sense for insurance companies, and it makes sense for doctors, and it makes sense for brokers, and that's why all of these stakeholder groups have come together and united around a bill that right now is in the House. And you know, because that bill, which initially has been introduced by Democrats, made some changes to reflect the desires of the insurance industry and the agents and the brokers and the doctors. And so these folks, they all think that an exchange would be better in Ohio. So it seems that it would be.
Are the same benefits available to Ohioans in terms of premium assistance through a federal exchange versus a state exchange?
It should be, yes, that's my understanding.
Ryan, is there anything you can do to force the administration to start with the exchanges? Or is it really out of your hands to enact, legally?
I know that people have looked at how the state could, how the legal implications of this could be, and we've taken a look at it. Honestly, I think the better course is that public opinion be that Ohio should do their own exchange and that there be public pressure to do that. It makes sense for the state. This would be one of the rare times that I've ever seen John Kasich kick something over to the federal government as opposed to trying to do it himself, which I find ironic. And I think, honestly, I believe that when the politics goes away on this, they're just going to do it as a state exchange. And I just think it's time to bury the politics. It's time for both sides to get together and find a way to implement. Wait, let me just make sure the reporters are...
You talked about the court fight being over, but we heard yesterday from Maurice Thompson that the court fights are not over, and that they will be suing using the constitutional amendment passed last year. How do you respond to that?
It's my understanding even the Attorney General has indicated that it's not likely to go very far if that case goes very far. Again, this is one more kind of part of the sour grapes response from yesterday. And I really think it's time to put aside the sour grapes and the politics of this and move on. I think that there is a way for both sides to come together to implement this in a way that makes sense.
But does more litigation create more delay?
Not necessarily. Not in this case. I believe that in the end, the federal law is going to move forward anyways by 2014. I might add that what Mr. Thompson is proposing would actually be a detriment to jobs and business in this state. For instance, if you were looking for a job and we did not have access to health care like every other state in the union, a lot of people would probably go to other states. It does not really make much sense from the standpoint of jobs in the state.